Dennis "Dinny" Meehan became leader of the White Hand Gang around 1910 and led the gang up until his death in 1920 when he was murdered. He was born in Brooklyn in 1889 and ran with the Warren Street Red Onion Gang in his early teens before eventually becoming the gang's leader. The Red Onion Gang formed in the early 1900s around Myrtle Avenue, described by police as mischievous youths who then progressed into other crime. Meehan was described a big burly Irishman who fought with his fists until he was knocked out or won the fight. During a murder trial, which was described at the time as sensational, Meehan and 3 other men were charged, tried and acquitted of the murder of Christy Maroney. The jury found that there was insufficient evidence and witnesses. Meehan was released. Supporters in the courtroom and street outside erupted in cheers. Maroney was a safe cracker around the Navy Yard in Brooklyn. Maroney refused to kick up money to the gang, so he was shot dead in a saloon, where he was a bartender. This whole incident added to Meehan's growing reputation. It was from then onward, the White Hand Gang ruled that section of Brooklyn with a deadly grip. With Meehan in control of the Brooklyn waterfront, the dock boss at each terminal had to pay tribute of money at a saloon at 25 Bridge Street called the Dock Loaders Club. Every laborer that was used to unload or load a ship or truck had to first report to Dinny Meehan under the Manhattan Bridge. If people or companies refused to pay, such as the owner of a factory or warehouse in the neighborhood, Meehan and his gang would make sure and steal whatever they could take from it. If a ship's captain didn't pay, Meehan would send someone like Cinders Connolly to set it on fire and untie from the pier, letting it burn in the East River where it would be seen by all. Pretty soon everyone got the message: pay up or else. Among the rackets along the docks, the gang would be hired as starkers, which meant that the International Longshoremen's Association, ILA, might hire the White Hand Gang to kill or threaten a New York Dock Company employee who refused to pay their union dues. Or the opposite, the New York Dock Company might hire the gang to kill or threaten a troublesome ILA union official. With Meehan in charge, everyone knew who to go to when they needed a job or if they needed someone taken care of. If someone talked too much, they would be found with a gunshot to the head or with their hands tied behind their back and dumped in the New York harbor. Unusually, unlike some of the other gang bosses, Meehan would often join the gang on jobs. By 1920, he had 3 cases pending against him. He was out of jail on a $5,000 bond for robbing a man on Fifth Avenue, the hijacking of a truckload of shoes worth $10,000, and overseeing the theft of $10,000 worth of silk from a Red Hook warehouse. Becoming the boss of Brooklyn's White Hand Gang was something that many wanted, none more so than Wild Bill Lovett. The current leader Dinny Meehan suspected that Lovett was going to become an issue that would have to be dealt with sooner or later. Unfortunately for Dinny Meehan, it came sooner. William Lovett was born in the Red Hook section of Brooklyn to a respectable Catholic family, but he would find himself straying to the wrong side of the tracks, stealing fruit from vendor carts, stealing lead pipes from houses and selling them to junkmen, and learned the basics of crime from the kids he hung out with on the streets. Like many he hung around with, he was arrested for minor crimes but would usually get off with a lecture from the police because of his family's standing in the community. By the time he was 18, Lovett had served a 6-month sentence for disorderly conduct. After his stint in prison, Lovett gravitated towards Brooklyn's docks. In pre-Prohibition-era Brooklyn, the docks held the best rackets in town for men like Bill Lovett. The dock wallopers or stevedores had a headquarters at 25 Bridge Street, and the boss of the docks at that time was Dinny Meehan. No one worked on the docks without Meehan's say-so, and everyone paid him a tribute for the pleasure. Meehan Meehan was suspicious of Lovett and viewed him as trouble. Lovett spoke with authority and would look Meehan in the eye in a way that the other dock workers wouldn't. They would clash once or twice. World War I broke out and Lovett signed up and went to France. He signed up to what was called the Suicide Squad, or the American Expeditionary Force, a machine gun unit, which was no easy placement. His officers were impressed with him as soon as they seen him in action, with one officer recollecting, "He was one of the coolest, most courageous men that ever lived. He was callous in the face of danger and went about the business of killing the enemy as calculatingly as if he were in a room all by himself with a job of work to do. I believe he enjoyed spraying lead into the German lines, and certainly he did his work efficiently." For his efforts in the war, shrapnel in his hip and a lung full of poisonous gas from the front line, Wild Bill Lovett was honorably discharged with the Distinguished Service Cross for gallantry in action. Wild Bill Lovett returned to Red Hook with a slight limp and aspirations to rule the docks. He went back to 25 Bridge Street to see Dinny Meehan. "Meehan, what do you want, Lovett?" "I want a gang of loaders. I've got them picked already." Meehan, "I'll see about it." Lovett, "I'll be here in the morning." Meehan knew that Wild Bill Lovett was trouble, as he knew before he left for the war. But now Lovett was a war hero and had a bit of a following, 10 to 15 men who were willing to fight for Lovett. Meehan had to give this consideration. If he said no to Lovett, it would cause rumblings on the docks and dissatisfaction with his leadership. If he said yes, he would lose a gang of men and knew that he would be out of pocket as Lovett and his men would leave him short every week. Bill Lovett didn't wait for an answer. The following morning he turned up at the docks with a gang of hand-picked men and chose the job of loading freight, which Lovett did nothing except watch the others do the work. Meehan knew the men that Wild Bill had picked were scrappers and the best of the lot and had made no mistakes in picking his men. After about a month of this arrangement, Meehan went to Lovett and said, "I'm not getting anything out of this gang at all. Put me on the payroll for 3 or 4 days a week and it'll be all right." But when payday came around, there was nothing for Meehan from Lovett's crew. The following morning Meehan called Lovett over to a corner. "How about my pay envelope for last week?" Lovett answered, "There ain't any." "You fucker," said Meehan. "Show up on this dock tomorrow and I'll kick you into the East River." A day or two later, Dinny Meehan was shot to death as he lay sleeping in his bed. According to police, the killer along with 4 other men arrived at Meehan's house. The killer let himself into the house and walked into the room where Meehan was sleeping and shot him in the head. The bullet passed through Meehan's head and through to his wife Sadie, who was asleep beside him. The bullet lodged in her arm. Although no one was ever charged for Meehan's murder, some say that it was carried out on the orders of Frankie Yale, a rival mobster from Brooklyn. However, Wild Bill Lovett was behind it. Meehan's wife would later identify Lovett as the killer. With Dinny Meehan out of the way, Wild Bill Lovett assumed control of the White Hand Gang. There was talk around the docks, with the dock loaders and stevedores speculating as to who Meehan's murderer was. The men who had gathered in the boss's office in Bridge Street felt they had guessed correctly when Bill Lovett walked into the room. Lovett walked through them, nodding to those who parted and walked straight to Meehan's chair, said, "From now on I'm boss in here. I'll be detained up at the police station for a day or two, but when I come back I'm going to be boss." The police came and took Lovett to the station, but no matter how hard they tried they couldn't connect any evidence of Meehan's murder to Bill Lovett. Meehan's wife had been awoken with the pain of being shot in the arm, but she couldn't or wouldn't identify anyone and the killer left no trace, and so Bill Lovett went free. Like most of the White Hand Gang's leaders, they all claimed leadership by bloody succession. The men on the docks looked upon Lovett with a new reverence. He was already a war hero due to his actions during World War I. When he gave an order, it was obeyed. His authority was never questioned by the dock loaders and stevedores. Lovett introduced a new pay scale. If the pay was $6, Lovett would get $2. If the pay was $4, he would get $1. Anyone who wanted a job on the docks had to do so with Lovett's say-so, and nobody held out on paying the boss. The first offense for not paying was a beating. The second offense for holding out was being sent to the hospital with a broken leg or arm. A couple of bodies were found lying around the docks, presumably the penalty for the third offense. Not everyone was happy with this new arrangement. Dinny Meehan was respected and still had friends who wanted to avenge the friend and leader's death. Tom Montague, a big burly Irishman, was one of Meehan's old crew. Montague wasn't afraid. He spoke his mind about Meehan's death. Lovett spoke sharply to Montague, who in turn spoke sharply back. There are differing accounts of what had happened. According to Nelson Robbins of the Standard Union, that night as Montague drank in a bar near the docks, he was boasting of his little outburst with Lovett. The more he drank, the more he spoke, and then he eventually said that he wasn't afraid to meet him now and have it out with him. Montague finally left the bar after some time, when 3 bullets were put into him from the shadows. Nobody in the bar left to see what had happened, and no one on the street came to his aid. He was eventually found by people leaving the bar. Montague was brought to hospital where his wounds were described as serious but not fatal. However, according to the Brooklyn Daily Eagle, Tom Montague had said that no one was man enough to knock his hat off. Bill Lovett said he would take a chance and drew his gun and shot Montague in the chest. He was then carried to Sands and Bridge Street where he was left, then taken to hospital. Bill Lovett and others were taken in for questioning by the police, but due to lack of evidence they were all released. Lovett left the police station and was looking for a taxicab to take him back to his office on Bridge Street. He walked down the street and turned the corner, not paying attention to the car that was following him. As the car pulled up alongside him, gunshots rang out and Bill fell as the car sped off. A crowd gathered round Bill, while an ambulance came to take him to the hospital. While the police questioned him at the hospital, Wild Bill said nothing, except that there was no hard feelings between him and Montague. 6 months after the failed attempt on Wild Bill, the first clue as to who the would-be assassin in the passing car was Gary Barry. Gary Barry was the leader of the Meehan faction of the gang, which was named the Red Onion Gang. Barry was a noted tough guy, with a record that stretched all the way back to 1900, when he first came to police attention. 4 years later, at the age of 16, he was before the courts on a murder charge, but he beat that charge. In January of 1913, Barry was shot in a saloon on Adams Street in Brooklyn. At the time, doctors didn't have much hope for him surviving, but he pulled through. Gary Barry and Dinny Meehan had been close friends. They appeared together in court in 1915. It's believed that Gary Barry, along with Pickles Layden and his brother William, assisted Dinny Meehan taking control of the gang. Gary Barry's body was found stabbed to death in a New York street. Barry had apparently met Dinny Meehan's widow Sadie, who was now married to a man named Harry Reynolds, with another couple, David and Mary Maloney. He was invited back to David Maloney's apartment for a few drinks, and it's believed a fight broke out between Barry, Maloney and Reynolds. Gary Barry had 2 stab wounds and his jugular vein in his neck had been slashed. Another one of the alleged shooters in the car was Dan Gillen. Gillen probably knew he was marked for death. Dan Gillen began to take precautions, never being alone, never walking alone, even bringing in smuggled alcohol he would make sure to with the crowd. He was cautious. One night at a bar where the gang drank, Gillen was enjoying a few drinks. The bar was full of longshoremen and the atmosphere was merry. There was drinking and singing. The bar erupted for the chorus, and some say they heard what sounded like a smack. Nobody took much notice until Dan Gillen stumbled forward saying, "He got me, he got me." Right in the crowd, "He got me." And Gillen fell on the floor and died. Bill Lovett left town for a while, but when he returned to Brooklyn he was arrested and questioned about Gillen's murder. leading him to say, "Can't anybody be murdered in this district by somebody else? I can't kill 'em all." Lovett beat the charge and walked. Throughout its tumultuous history, the White Hand Gang and its inner factions continued to kill each other. Peter Meehan, a friend of Gary Berry, was murdered in 1921. Meehan's body was found with a wound over his eye, consistent with a blunt object. Dennis Culkin, a police officer from Coney Island, was arrested but not charged with Meehan's murder, though he did admit to having an argument with Meehan. In 1922, Peter Meehan's brother, Joseph, was found dead, in a scene similar to the murder of Dinny Meehan. A gunman or gunmen had let themselves into Meehan's apartment while he was asleep beside his wife and shot him dead. His wife woke up to the sound of gunfire and someone running from the apartment.